anytime I watch media, I do this second view, a second watch. So the first time I just watch it and I just take mental notes. And then the second time I watch it, I take physical notes. And boy, is it complicated.
I'd like to know why it's so complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated.
I definitely would like to know why.
It's complicated because the feelings that Shinji has and the way he conveys it, and then the dynamics he has with the other people, it has so many different layers to that you have to peel back to understand. And that's what makes it complicated. And to put words into that, to communicate that, to articulate that is one thing. And then, but then to articulate what you peel back from the different layers is another. So that's really complicated. It's like, how do I talk about these things, right? How do I convey this?
But is it your job to explain Shinji?
No, it's not that. It's how do I even convey the things that I'm feeling from this,
Okay.
right? It's that. It's not, I mean, to do this, even just sort of doing like, you know, the conceptualization on Shinji, right, is hard. But that's not the point. The point is just sort of understanding those emotions and peeling back those layers and articulating that while considering all these different elements. That's hard. That's what I found difficult. So I was like, okay, I'm getting ready. I'm gonna try to get ready for this filming, and where do I even start and how do I even like get there? I can say I understand why people were not a huge fan of Shinji. This episode, it was clear to me, I understand why, right? Because he's showing these elements of his personality that's not really, it doesn't draw people in. He makes it very complicated for the other person to understand, especially because he doesn't even express those emotions. But the thing is, he can't express those emotions because he doesn't have a framework for how to even express those emotions. I don't even know if he understands what he's feeling. I can understand why people are not a fan of him. And I can tell you that I understand him, and I could tell you why I understand him. And that's because I've gone through a period of my life, and I want to say it was during my late teens. It could have been just in my teens. It was in my teens, into my 20s, that I showed a lot of ways of, a lot of characteristics that Shinji shows in episodes 3 and 4 of Evangelion. Okay, I'm trying to figure out, like, where do I even start? As I was saying, in this episode, I could see why people really don't like Shinji.
Yeah.
And it's because of the way he doesn't communicate, but it's also underneath all those things are like different expectations that he has. And I don't think that that's something that most people are either able to understand or able to navigate or even want to deal with it, because it's too much. It's too complicated, or it's too effortful, or it's too much trying to like do a lot of mind reading. And that's not something that most people are either have the capacity to do, the patience to do, the understanding to do, or desire to do. So Shinji has these two conversations with Misato, And in the first conversation, it's right after the battle, right after that fight where his two friends ended up in the pod. And he says, and Misato says, you know, like, why didn't you obey my order? I asked you to retreat. Why didn't you do it? You know, are you going to do it next time I tell you to do it? And he just says, yes, yes, yes. And then he goes on to just basically say, I mean, he has a smile on his face and he's like, well, you know, I don't care if I die anyway. It's not like, you know, because Misato's expressing him, you know, him almost being killed, that he could have gotten killed. And that right there, that whole scene and that whole dialogue is really complicated. Because on that surface level, first he sounds like he's being obedient. And then he just really sounds like he's being passive aggressive. But you know, though, it's almost as if he's like damned if he does and he's damned if he doesn't. Like he gets to, he's asked to pilot this Eva. And then he gets to a point where, you know, really they want him to do it so then they could win against the angels. Ultimately, isn't that the point?
Mm-hmm.
But when he makes his own executive decision to be successful, and he was successful, he makes his own executive decision and he's successful in this battle, what is that met with?
Idiot. Misato spends the whole episode calling him an idiot. I think she kind of called him a baka like 4 times. Idiot, idiot, idiot. Everything he does. Idiot.
Mm-hmm. She scolds him.
Mm-hmm.
So even though he's like sort of involuntarily ended up in this Eva and became a part of this 𝘠𝘪𝘴, and then he makes his own autonomous choice and he's successful, and then he's called an idiot and he's being scolded for this. Now, I know where Misato's coming from. She's concerned. It's like two people. It's two people who are not really like conveying exactly what they're feeling.
No one was concerned when they stuffed him in that thing and said, "Oh, you just have to sit in it," and he almost died.
Right. It's true. So you can tell though Misato is worried about him, right? She doesn't really convey it because she still like thinks of him and she still worries about him, right?
Mm-hmm.
But here's the problem with this whole situation. He does this thing. She scolds him. Even though he was successful. And ultimately, Shinji, it may seem like as if he's being passive aggressive, but to me, it almost seems like it's his resolve. It's an interesting thing because I've been in, you know, positions like that in my life, especially when I was in my younger years, in my teens and 20s. And having grown up in an invalidating environment, not having collected enough evidence from the world, and especially from like, you know, the figures that you're supposed to have all this unconditional love from, you didn't really get that. And then later on, they sort of, you know, when you do something wrong, even though it may have been a good thing, like they scold you, you come to this place of just sort of like, you throw your hands up in the air and you just say, okay. That's what I saw in Shinji, because that's what I've experienced for myself. You get to this place where you just are told that you can't do anything right, even when you have done something right. And that's how I saw Shinji. Now, had Misato approached him in a different way, would his response be different? I think so. I absolutely think so. Because in my life, when people came towards me with warmth, that's when I responded best. And you can see that Shinji wants that, though, you know? And I said this to you last time, or I said this on camera last time, that my experience with Eva is so complicated. It's complicated because it hits on so many different layers of all these emotional stuff, all these emotional complexities that you're getting underneath dialogue. And it's so hard to come at that with, one, being able to comprehend it, but then two, knowing that I feel it. I feel Shinji, and I feel Shinji because his experiences are so close to mine. We may not have had exactly the same upbringing. I mean, I still have my parents, but the sort of emotional neglect that you have from your attachments, your parental figures, or anyone close to you, that emotional neglect and that invalidation where your emotions are not even validated or your existence is not even counted for anything, that affects you. That changes you. That determines who you become. And for Shinji, without any protective factors, he has none. I mean, in this episode, you see him developing some, but he's getting his feet wet now. But he has none. He doesn't have any protective factors, and protective factors are like social, like social supports, or hobbies, or things that he's connected to. Things that keep you from falling into a state of depression or changing you in negative ways. He doesn't have that. I didn't have that growing up either. Growing up was just this constant, being in this constant mode of survival. And when you don't have these protective factors in place, you end up with a kind of end result, which is then Shinji and me. And that lasted, and I noticed that took effect for me in my teens and my 20s, especially during that period of time. And then going into my later 20s, becoming a little bit more aware of how I was interacting with people was something that I realized was a problem. But up until then, I didn't know that I wasn't communicating well. I didn't know that at times I was coming off as passive aggressive as Shinji did in both of his conversations with Misato. But you know what? I really hate the fact that it seems as if it's passive aggressive, because it's a label. It's a label for the outcome or what he ends up becoming because of his circumstances, because what his environment has taught him. I'm not a huge fan of these labels. I'm not a huge fan of even the diagnosis of mental illness either, because it pathologizes you. Shinji could fit into, a personality disorder. But I really hate to say that. I really hate to give him that label, because it was something that the environment taught him. And if the environment taught him to be a certain way, then does that make you pathological? In essence, yes. But is it still a function of a human experience? Yes. Can it be undone? Yes. Shinji has, in his 2 conversations with Misato, he comes off as being very passive aggressive. In that first conversation with Misato, he scolded. He's scolded by Misato. She says to him, why did you not obey me? Why did you like disobey my command? And are you going to do this next time? Are you going to listen to me next time? And he just says hi. He's like, yes, yes, yes. And then she gets so mad at him because he comes to this point of just like smiling. He's like, well, it is what it is, basically. And she's like, well, you could have been, killed out there. And he's like, well, I don't care if I die. Why should he care if he dies? At that point, that statement is like the ultimate resolve for him. And I've been there. I've been at this place where people have told me, people have scolded me for some, my mom, my parents, they may have scolded me for some things. And it's like, okay, fine. I'll just, what? I did everything up to a point where it was your way. And now I did it my way, and I found success by doing it my way, but you still don't approve of that. You throw your hands up in the air, and then you just basically say, okay, well, screw that. All right, okay. All right, I'll listen to you. All right, Elaine, I'll listen to you. It's more than just passive aggressive. It's this underlying helplessness at that point. That you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Had Misato come across to him in a different way, had she started this dialogue with him in a different way, would things have been different for Shinji? I would bet a huge yes on that. Because my experiences were so hostile with people in general, where your successes were, even though when you had your own successes it was overlooked, or maybe someone else attributed it to their own contributions, and therefore you were successful. I mean, that's another one of those invalidating experiences too. When you have these moments, you just kind of are put in this place of feeling very helpless. And you just wonder, well then, what does it matter? Now, like I said, if Misato had come across a different way, had she said to him, Shinji, what you did was really amazing, but I was so scared to death for you, or I was really worried about you. And next time I want you to listen to me, because the last thing I want is to lose you for any, is to lose you. If she came to him with this warmth and softness, his response would not be that. In Shinji's case, I truly believe that was a function of the circumstances that created that response towards Misato. And there's a fine line between like different ones, right? Different like interactions. And the reason why I believe this about Shinji is because I've had that experience where people have come to me either with hostility, or they've come to me with, warmth and like being softer. And it was always when people were softer with me that I didn't feel like I had to fight back, or like protect what little I felt of myself that I needed to preserve. So had Misato come to him in a different way, I think his response would have been very different in that moment. Now, the second time that Shinji comes back and has this conversation with Misato, after 2 days of having his walkabout. I think she makes this attempt at trying to be soft with him. She says, are you going to pilot the Eva? Actually, what did she say? Hold on. Before she even talks about that, she asks him, no, he asks her, "You're not going to scold me from running away?" And he says, "Of course not. I'm not related to you, am I?" So the one time he wants to hear being scolded is him grasping at straws to see if she even cares about him. And you see this evident a few times with Shinji, and I think it was in the last episode as well, and I can't remember which example it was, but he's constantly grasping at someone to acknowledge him and someone to care about him. And this may be so confusing to Misato, because I've had experiences like this as well during that period of time in my life where I wanted to hear certain things and I never got it. And then the person, maybe the other person would react in a way that was very completely different from that. Like, okay, well, did Misato hold back because she didn't want to scold him like she did the first time? But the two conversations are completely different. The first time she doesn't acknowledge his success. The second time she doesn't acknowledge his meaning. Like how important he is to her. To the person who's interacting with someone like Shinji, that's very confusing. You could tell that Shinji's... The thing I wanted to mention next is you could tell that Shinji wants what he wants what he's able to give. When Shinji meets his friend out in the woods, and Shinji says to him, you shouldn't want to get in a robot and fight like this because your mother would be worried. He comes to him with so much warmth. It's the same thing when he saw Rei falling and he was willing to, at that point, that was a decision where he made that he was going to get into the Eva so she wouldn't. It's almost, it's like every time there's these moments, he's willing to get in, he's able to show that warmth, and all he wants is to have that back. And that reminds me of so much of me, where I've often just wanted someone to understand me and someone to give me warmth back and someone to just give me some softness, because a lot of the times I was always met with a lot of hostility from my circumstances, a lot of confrontations. Kind of reminds me of my father, actually, now talking about this. For a very long time, I never really quite understood my father. He was an alcoholic, and growing up, that's all I knew, that he was an alcoholic. It was later in my life when I discovered that he lost both his parents starting at the age of 17, 18, and he lost one parent after the other in a matter of just 2 years. And my father's older, and he grew up in the era of the Korean War. Actually, he was born in Japan, and I believe he was in Japan when they deployed the atomic bombs. And although he wasn't near those areas, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, he was still what is there another word for saying victim but not quite the victim? He was still...
He was affected by it?
Yes, that's the word. He was still affected by it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of... This is just sort of me piecing together his life as well. He never talks about... He has never talked about his life, his history. So I don't really know much other than like when his father was... when he lost his parents. My father was always hostile. He never demonstrated any warm feelings. He never showed us any active actions of love. So it was years later when I became more softened and less feral. I would even say that I was kind of feral in my teens. Don't you dare say anything. I need a tissue. So, as I was saying, it was years later when I, softened up a little bit, and I was able to sort of get past, at least a little bit past my feelings towards him. That when I softened up, especially when he had these moments of raging, like, oh my God, like he had absolutely no frustration. He has absolutely no frustration tolerance. And anger is an emotion that he wears on his sleeves. You don't know when he would explode. It could be anywhere, even in the middle of Walmart. I mean, but then that wouldn't be okay. We have a lot of things. Well, yeah, that's pretty average. So like, let's but like even in the middle of any any like function, right? But it's when I noticed that when he had these moments, and I actually just took his hand and just told him that it was okay. He softened too. Mm. The fact that I was able to, that he was receptive to that warmth was so telling to me. It's so telling because it in some ways, I was just gonna say in some ways that's what Shinji wants. To sort of give him that. Do you know what it means to have just that one person that you want acknowledgement from? I mean, Shinji must respect his father, right?
Sure.
It's either respect or because he's the person that's closest to him. It could be both. It could be just the latter. The value of that is so immense if you have that one person that you just care about and you want that person to just sort of acknowledge you, because that just completely means that you were meant something. It didn't matter that in the middle of all this class, in his class, where when someone asked him, you know, are you the pilot of Eva? And everyone's like, oh my God, sugoi desu! And they were so proud of him, and they thought it was like the best thing ever, right? None of that mattered to him, because none of those people were important to him. And I would even imagine that even as his friends get closer to him, that it won't resonate. The positivity or that acknowledgement will not resonate the same way as it would coming from his father. And in this episode, he even says, when the fourth angel gets there, he even says, why am I piloting this thing again, even though my father's not here? He says it. Even though I got beat up.
Yeah.
Why is he doing it? He has absolutely no reason.
Because he was told to.
Right, because in the beginning they just think that like that's all he does. He just follows orders, and that's how he lives his life. Yeah, I wonder why Shinji, agreed to continue piloting after what happened. It could seem he simply does what he's ordered to do. I suppose that's just his way of getting through life. But you see, I could see how you could get stuck in that. I could see how I've been stuck in that too. Where you just kind of go through the motions of doing what you're told to do. I mean, that was my life all throughout my childhood and my early, my teens. And going into college as well, even through my college years. My mom was my ultimate figure, who I respected and obeyed, and actually no, I don't know if I really obeyed her. I was so feisty. But for the most part, you try to. It's funny, right? Because on one hand, I was very argumentative, and I fought a lot with my parents, especially my mom. But then on that same coin was me wanting to appease them and gain their approval constantly. The fighting was so separate from me still wanting to get their approval. Because it really never came. Or if it came in the nice package of, well, you're this way because I made you this way. Well, I guess. All right, sure. Hey, that's it. You just concede, and you have this resolve, and that's where you are. But have you noticed how like Shinji lights up during these small moments? He really lit up when his friends acknowledged him. When his friends actually say to him, we saw how you suffered through that, Eva. And then they said that they understood why he wasn't going to do it anymore. His eyes grew big. And that acknowledgement was so huge to Shinji. And here's what's another thing that's so complicated. You would wonder, well, why did he then, as he was going up the stairs, right? Well, after he came up the stairs and he looked back and he said, well, no. He says, I'm the one that deserves to be hit. I'm mean, cowardly, dishonest, weak, sneaky, and a wimp. Why would he have said that? here's what's really complicated. So when you've spent your whole life being told that those are the things that you are, there's a huge part of you that believes it. So for growing up, there was a huge part of me that believed that I was all these things, all these negative things. And you hold on to that. You hold on to that as part of your identity. If the people that supposedly loved you said it, then it must be true, right? And then he gets this glimmer of validation from his friends. There's something about that. There's something to it where you can't accept that. It's like, well, how can that be true? How can you give me credit and then give me understanding when I know that deep down I am all these things that other people have told me? How can that be true? And then you hear it and you just think, oh no, this is not the kind of credit I deserve, because there's something that feels so bad about being told that you're the opposite of that. So as much as Shinji really glowed with that validation, he couldn't accept it. Ultimately, it was so hard for him to take in. It would go against everything he believed in of himself. And then there's this guilt, because maybe then that's, it just would feel bad. In the beginning of episode 3, Misato talks to Ritsuka, and she says, oh, Shinji still hasn't gotten a single phone call from any of his classmates. And then Ritsuka says, well, maybe it's, it's like the hedgehog dilemma. He doesn't want to get hurt, basically. Yeah. Right. Because the closer you get to someone, sometimes, you might get hurt because the other person's going to know more about you. They're going to know your demons. But also, you would end up setting up some expectations of them as a relationship develops, and disappointment does happen. But Ritsuka says, well, he's going to have to learn someday that part of growing up means finding a way to interact with others while distancing pain. Ultimately, the question is how. For Shinji and for myself, this is something that I didn't understand for the longest time in my life. Back then when I was in high school and in college, to be honest, I didn't even know what therapy was. I mean, that was so long ago. Therapy now is a lot different than, what I understood therapy to be back then. Although I can't really quite speak for whether or not the quality has gotten any better. But still, that's another point. The ultimate question is how. How do you learn to navigate life? How do you learn to navigate relationships? And you can't just throw someone who's vulnerable into this cage or into this world and just say, all right, have at it. Good luck. You get hurt, you get hurt. Godspeed. The thing I realized about myself was that I absolutely had no framework and no foundation to understand relationships at all. The foundation for which I understood relationships comes from immigrant parents who at the time came from a third world country. I was a child of that, of those immigrant parents, and I actually was an immigrant myself. I came here when I was 1.5 years. Not that I don't know how much that counts. I had no foundation for which I understood love for what it's supposed to be and how it's supposed to be felt. I had no concept of what it means to deeply care about someone else in positive ways as a child, because that wasn't shown to me. We constantly had stressors because we lived in poverty. My parents didn't speak any English, and so I became the adult child. My father drank heavily. My mom developed a lot of somatic symptoms because of the stresses that she was enduring between immigration, acculturation, alcoholism, racism, and managing a small fish store. So the question then is, okay, how would I have understood love? How would I have understood relationships, healthy ones? How would I be able to connect with other people, especially people who really didn't understand my circumstances? This was a huge reason why I had to stay invisible. No one really understood me. None of my classmates did. No one tried. In fact, I was, made fun of often for being Asian. Well, and for smelling like fish. For someone like me, how do I learn someday that part of growing up means finding a way to interact with others? So the question is how. It's always how. The how is always difficult. In my situation, it took years of a lot of insight for me into my own thoughts and my feelings and why I acted the way I did. And taking that apart to understand, maybe how some things were unhealthy or why I perpetuated certain patterns of relating to other people. And then developing myself, having a better sense of who I was, and learning to have value in myself. But that doesn't come easy. That's a very difficult task. And then it was about putting it into action, taking these small steps towards building something and being open and not being afraid to communicate. But the thing with communication that's really complicated is that if you don't understand your own feelings, you can't communicate. How would Shinji go out there and learn this? He doesn't have enough ego strength right now. He can't go out there and be rejected because it would devastate him. He's fragile. When he falls alone. And the biggest thing is, who would he have to help pick him up? And if you have no one there to help pick you up, that fall is pretty hard. I like that Misato is trying. She doesn't quite get it. However, she's trying. At the end, she has this realization. She says, "The closer we become, the more deeply we hurt each other. That boy, he can't let others know how he feels in any other way." That's why I like Misato. Because she tries. Do you see anyone else there really like giving effort? I mean his father was absent the whole time, but she's trying though.
Yeah. I see that.
In her own way. For something that I would imagine would be really hard for her to understand, because that's not her norm either. The way Shinji presents is not her norm. Misato seems pretty normal. Like, normal is a pretty strange word. You know, she has a way of relating that's typical. And Shinji's far complex. And she's at least giving effort to understand that. And she thinks on it and she ponders it. That's why I like Misato. Even though her dialogue and her synergy with Shinji just isn't really working right now, I have a lot of faith. That's another weird word. I have a lot of hope. It's going to be passive. It's passive hope. I have a lot of hope that their relationship will continue to develop because she's trying. That end scene where Misato and Shinji make eye contact. It just felt like so many unspoken words that were being conveyed in silence to one another. It felt like, you know, Misato was probably saying to Shinji all those things that she wanted to have said and that she should have said. I worry about you. I care about you. I was worried that you were going to get killed. Those I statements that give someone else meaning. And who knows what Shinji was thinking. I think if anything, it's just this really deeply felt moment that she cares.
Mm-hmm.
She must really care. That he felt cared for.
Mm-hmm.
That he mattered. When Shinji says "Tadaima,"
Mm-hmm.
basically he's identified Misato. I mean, they physically live together, but he basically has identified Misato as family. In that moment.
Mm-hmm.
As someone that matters. As someone that he has who worries about him now. And then she says "Okaeri." And it's those words are an embrace. It was a very touching moment. It tears me up it made me tear up when I saw it, and it tears me up when I think of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even after all these years, it's still very effective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a lot of emotional weight to that. Mm-hmm, for sure. We open up the anime opens with Shinji in the Eva. And he is in this completely dissociated state. I mean, it could look like... Let's stick with the dissociated state. He's in this extremely dissociated state. And he's just repeating the same words over again. Target in the center and fire.
Total switch.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
that was really heartbreaking to watch, because, and then the people go on to saying, well, you know, like, I can't believe Shinji's still doing this even after like what happened the last time, right? Because no one processes this with him. No one talks to him about what he's done or the events that took place. No one's there to ask him if he's okay. Even when he woke up from that hospital bed, no one was there to greet him. There was no note left for him. There was nothing. And so he's back in this Eva, and now he's just going through the motions. And he's just sitting with this trauma. And this is one of those other moments where I think to myself, had someone talked to him about what happened after that last battle, he wouldn't be this way. And that these set of circumstances leads him to act or become how he is now. This makes me think of then Misato's conversation. So Misato is looking for Shinji in the house, right? She's like, Shinji, are you there? After the second battle. And she's like, it's been 5 days. Are you still going to skip school? You know, the Eva unit's already repaired now. Are you not going to pilot it? It's already ready for you. And all I heard in that moment was, well, the Eva unit got fixed in 5 days. Are you not okay by now? If only mental health could be repaired in 5 days. It's more like 5 years. In some cases. I just keep thinking that there are these moments where things could be different for Shinji. And it just doesn't come the way it should to him. See, let me just dig a little deeper and let me see. It's heartbreaking for me because growing up, right, like the alcoholism and the domestic violence that basically took place daily at my house, in our tiny, like, 1-bedroom apartment. You have this experience, right, on a daily basis. You come home, your parents fight, sometimes the dinner table goes flying everywhere. In the middle of that, you're trying to do your homework. And then you go back to school the next day as if nothing happened. Even though you were up till like 2 o'clock in the morning because your parents were fighting. Or because the police had to come by and make a trip. But you still go to school as if nothing happened to you. And after, like, there's some days where it just kind of hits you a little harder than others. There were some days that hit me a little harder than others. There's sometimes you just kind of like become numb to it, and then you just kind of go through the motions. You just accept that that's part of your daily routine now. And then there are some other times where someone gets hurt. And you still go to school the next day as if nothing happened. But you're in class all day. I'm in class all day with this emotional hangover of everything that happened the night before. and you go through the motions of just getting through school. I just had a moment there where there were times where the teachers picked on me and told me that I didn't participate enough in class. And that, oh my God, did that bother me. And as a child, like, what language do you have to even convey that? I don't even know if I had the capacity to be able to talk about my feelings back then. But I honestly don't think that the teachers had the capacity to even hear it either. So all you do, all I did, was you pick up your pen, you listen to the teacher, you write. Pick up your pen, listen to the teacher, you write. And that was no different from the routine that Shinji was going through, just to get through his training. And for me, that was just to get through my school day. To then just, start all over again. And there was not a single person to have asked me, "Are you okay? How are you doing? Is there something going on?" Nothing. No one in my school ever knew how my life was at home. Not the teachers, not my classmates. No one knew. So that moment where Shinji's sitting in that Eva, that's why it was heartbreaking. In many ways, this was a pretty positive episode. I think Shinji's being understood more for sure, and now by other people. And Misato's trying to figure him out. And that's positive. Now going forward, if we'll see if Shinji could figure out a little bit more, and that it would contribute to change. But we'll see. Why is that question even complicated too? Jeez. And I say that because, I started off by saying that Evangelion is very complicated. Am I enjoying it? Enjoying it is not quite the word. I am fascinated by it though. I'm interested in it. I feel more than anything connected to it on an emotional level. It's hard to watch, but at the same time, it's okay. Watching this and then trying to do this media therapy with it has been an interesting process. I'm finding parallels in my life that are really in line with Shinji's experiences, and that interests me and also makes it hard to watch sometimes. But as I'm doing this, what I'm finding is that it's making me really think about my own feelings. I haven't really had like any need to really talk about my feelings or my life experiences like the way I have with Evangelion. It just doesn't come up. It hasn't come up. So what I'm finding is that I'm developing a way of thinking about it and trying to find language for those emotional experiences. And figuring out a way to articulate that. Because like I said, there's like this first layer of like how Shinji feels, and then the second, and then everything underneath that. Like, what is he really truly feeling? And it really takes intuition, I think, to understand it and then to put it into words. Can't say that that experience is enjoyable, but it is definitely something. it's something. I want to know, I'm curious as to know why the angels are called angels. So now the fourth angel, the fourth angel showed up, right? They have numbers. Why do they have numbers? So that's interesting. I want to see if Misato comes around to understanding a lot more. I'm really kind of rooting for her growth as well. Her growth in understanding other people and being able to read between the lines. I really like his friends that he came across. Especially the kid with the glasses, but they both are positive so far. And they're kind of seeing things realistically, and I like that. It's not skewed. Okay, well, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Well, I won't be seeing you. You guys will be seeing me. The modality is fine. It's just, how we come at things is a little, is what gives me a headache. It's not about the modality. The modality is fine. The modality has a way of being able to sort of, ironically, more gently challenge you. But with the experience through a third party, which makes it less threatening.
People are already doing this. That's the whole reason people watch media, is to be displaced. We don't watch media because we want to look at ourselves on screen. We watch media because we want to watch other people and sort of distance ourselves, be taken out of ourselves, as the phrase goes. But that in and of itself is a kind of therapy, that you want to experience something from a safe distance. And you can cry and laugh and have all of your emotions and say, oh, this has nothing to do with me, and that's very safe, but it does have something to do with you. If you're crying and laughing, it has something to do with you.
Yeah,
so
sure.
People are doing it, they just don't realize it,
Mm-hmm.
And I would rather see people sit in front of the TV and get something positive out of it than sit there just to escape life. You're not really escaping life, you're just putting a wall between you and it that makes you feel a little bit safer to experience it.